Essence in quotes. Dalai Lama 14. The Book of Joy. Materialistic values cannot give us peace of mind. So we really need to focus on our inner values, our true humanity. Only this way can we have peace of mind and more peace in our world. A lot of the problems we are facing are our own creation, like war and violence. Unlike a natural disaster, these problems are created by humans ourselves. Everyone has the responsibility to develop a happier world. We need, ultimately, to have a greater concern for others' well-being. In other words, kindness or compassion, which is lacking now. We must pay more attention to our inner values. We must look inside. In order to develop our mind, we must look at a deeper level. Everyone seeks happiness, joyfulness, but from outside, from money, from power, from big car, from big house. Most people never pay much attention to the ultimate source of a happy life, which is inside, not outside. Even the source of physical health is inside, not outside. Personally, I am Buddhist, and I consider faith very important, but at the same time the reality is that out of 7 billion people, over 1 billion people on the planet are non-believers. So we cannot exclude them. 1 billion is quite a large number. They are also our human brothers and sisters. They also have the right to become happier human beings and to be good members of the human family. So one need not depend on religious faith to educate our inner values. The more we experience any pleasure, the more we become numb to its effects and take its pleasures for granted. The first bowl of ice cream is sublime, the second bowl tasty, and the third causes indigestion. It is like a drug that must be taken in ever greater quantities to produce the same high. When you are pursuing happiness, you are not going to find it. It's very, very elusive. You don't find it by saying, I'm going to forget about everything and just pursue happiness. It's wonderful to discover that what we want is not actually happiness. It is not actually what I would speak of. I would speak of joy. Joy subsumes happiness. Joy is the far greater thing. Think of a mother who is going to give birth. Almost all of us want to escape pain. And mothers know that. They are going to have pain, the great pain of giving birth. But they accept it. And even after the most painful labor, once the baby is out, you can't measure the mother's joy. It is one of those incredible things that joy can come so quickly from suffering. There are really only 4 fundamental emotions, 3 of which are so-called negative emotions: fear, anger, and sadness. The only positive one is joy or happiness. Exploring joy is nothing less than exploring what makes human experience satisfying. As we recognize others' suffering and realize that we are not alone, our pain is lessened. There are different aspects to any event. For example, we lost our own country and became refugees, but that same experience gave us new opportunities to see more things. Personally, I prefer the last 5 decades of refugee life. It's more useful, more opportunity to learn, to experience life. Therefore, if you look from one angle, you feel, oh how bad, how sad. But if you look from another angle at that same tragedy, that same event, you see that it gives me new opportunities. So, it's wonderful. That's the main reason that I'm not sad and morose. The question is not, how do I escape? It is, how can I use this as something positive? It's going to happen whether you like it or not. There are going to be frustrations in life. The question is not, how do I escape? It is, how can I use this as something positive? Some suffering, maybe even intense suffering, is a necessary ingredient for life, certainly for developing compassion. When Nelson Mandela went to jail, he was young and, you could almost say, bloodthirsty. He spent 27 years in jail, and many would say, 27 years, oh, what a waste. And I think the 27 years were necessary. They were necessary to remove the dross. The suffering in prison helped him to become more magnanimous, willing to listen to the other side. To discover that the people he regarded as his enemy, they too were human beings who had fears and expectations. And they had been molded by their society. And so without the 27 years, I don't think we would have seen the Nelson Mandela with the compassion, the magnanimity, the capacity to put himself in the shoes of the other. It is how we face all of the things that seem to be negative in our lives that determines the kind of person we become. If we regard all of this as frustrating, we're going to come out squeezed and tight and just angry and wishing to smash everything. Nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration, some suffering. This is the nature of things. This is how our universe has been made up. If you want to be a good writer, you are not going to become one by always going to the movies and eating bonbons. You have to sit down and write, which can be very frustrating, and yet without that you would not get that good result. A self-centered attitude is the source of the problem. We have to take care of ourselves without selfishly taking care of ourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, we cannot survive. We need to do that. We should have wise selfishness rather than foolish selfishness. Foolish selfishness means you just think only of yourself, don't care about others, bully others, exploit others. In fact, taking care of others, helping others, ultimately is the way to discover your own joy and to have a happy life. So that is what I call wise selfishness. Contemplate that, as long as you are too focused on your self-importance and too caught up in thinking about how you are good or bad, you will experience suffering. Obsessing about getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want does not result in happiness. So much depends on where we put our attention, on our own suffering or that of others, on our own perceived separation or on our indivisible connection. The three factors that seem to have the greatest influence on increasing our happiness are our ability to reframe our situation more positively, our ability to experience gratitude, and our choice to be kind and generous. When we speak of experiencing happiness, we need to know that there are actually two different kinds. The first is the enjoyment of pleasure through our senses. Sex is one such experience. But we can also experience happiness at the deeper level through our mind, such as through love, compassion, and generosity. What characterizes happiness at this deeper level is the sense of fulfillment that you experience. While the joy of the senses is brief, the joy at this deeper level is much longer, lasting. It is true joy. Hedonism is the default philosophy of most people and certainly has become the dominant view of consumer shop till you drop culture. Yet scientists have found that the more we experience any pleasure, the more we become numb to its effects and take its pleasures for granted. The first bowl of ice cream is sublime, the second bowl tasty, and the third causes indigestion. It is like a drug that must be taken in ever greater quantities to produce the same high. Ultimately, our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. I could not speak as I am speaking without having learned it from other human beings. I could not walk as a human being. I could not think as a human being, except through learning it from other human beings. I learned to be a human being from other human beings. We belong in this delicate network. It is actually quite profound. Unfortunately, in our world we tend to be blind to our connection until times of great disaster. How do you develop trust? It's simple. You show your genuine sense of concern for their well-being. Then trust will come. But if behind an artificial smile, or a big banquet, is a self-centered attitude deep inside of you, then there will never be trust. If you are thinking how to exploit, how to take advantage of them, then you can never develop trust in others. Without trust, there is no friendship. We, human beings, are social animals, as we've said, and we need friends. Genuine friends. Friends for money, friends for power are artificial friends. When we are able to move beyond our own pain and suffering, we are more available to others. Pain causes us to be extremely self-focused. Whether the pain is physical or mental, it seems to consume all of our focus and leave very little attention for others. Survey after survey has shown that it is unhappy people who tend to be most self-focused and are socially withdrawn, brooding, and even antagonistic. Happy people, in contrast, are generally found to be more sociable, flexible, and creative, and are able to tolerate life's daily frustrations more easily than unhappy people. And, most important, they are found to be more loving and forgiving than unhappy people. The way we heal our own pain is actually by turning to the pain of others. It is a virtuous cycle. The more we turn toward others, the more joy we experience, and the more joy we experience, the more we can bring joy to others. If possible, serve and help others. If not possible, then at least not to harm others. Scientists have found that we need love to survive. Our mothers show tremendous love and affection to us when we are born. Many scientists say that after birth, there are a number of weeks when the mother's physical touch is the key factor to developing the brain properly. After birth, if the child is isolated without the mother or physical touch, it can be very harmful. This is nothing to do with religion. This is biology. We need love. Everyone knows that physical pain is bad and tries to avoid it. We do this not only by curing diseases, but also by trying to prevent them and by trying to keep our physical immunity strong. Mental pain is equally bad, so we should try to alleviate it as well. The way to do this is to develop mental immunity. Mental immunity is just learning to avoid the destructive emotions and to develop the positive ones. First, we must understand the mind. There are so many different states of mind, the diverse thoughts and emotions we experience on a daily basis. Some of these thoughts and emotions are harmful, even toxic, while others are healthy and healing. The former disturb our mind and cause much mental pain. The latter bring us true joyfulness. If your health is strong, when viruses come they will not make you sick. If your overall health is weak, even small viruses will be very dangerous for you. Similarly, if your mental health is sound, then when disturbances come, you will have some distress but quickly recover. If your mental health is not good, then small disturbances, small problems will cause you much pain and suffering. You will have much fear and worry, much sadness and despair, and much anger and aggravation. People would like to be able to take a pill that makes their fear and anxiety go away and makes them immediately feel peaceful. This is impossible. One must develop the mind over time and cultivate mental immunity. Often people ask me for the quickest and best solution to a problem. Again, this is impossible. You can have quickest or you can have best solution, but not both. The best solution to our suffering is mental immunity, but it takes time to develop. We human beings have the ability to make a distinction between the rational level and the emotional level. At the rational level, we accept that this is a serious problem that we have to deal with, but at the deeper, emotional level, we are able to keep calm. Like the ocean has many waves on the surface but deep down it is quite calm. This is possible if we know how to develop mental immunity. Even with this mental immunity, there will be times when we will have negative or destructive emotions, and when this does happen, the last thing we want to do is judge ourselves harshly. We try to control the moment, which results in our feeling that what is happening should not be happening. So much of what causes heartache is our wanting things to be different than they are. No one ought to feel annoyed with themselves. It just adds to the frustration. I mean, we are human beings, fallible human beings. This being on earth is a time for us to learn to be good, to learn to be more loving, to learn to be more compassionate. And you learn, not theoretically. You learn when something happens that tests you. You learn how to react to a child who is really frustrating you. You are better with your third child than you were with your first child. And so I would say to everyone, you are made for perfection, but you are not yet perfect. You are a masterpiece in the making. Fear and anxiety are mechanisms that have helped us to survive. You know, if you did not feel fear when you saw a lion over there and you just walked merrily by, in next to no time there would be no you. God has given us these things because God knew that we needed them. Otherwise, we would be fearless, but then we'd also be very stupid, and we would not be around very long. The problem is, when the fear is exaggerated or when it is provoked by something that is really quite insignificant. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Courage is indeed the triumph of our heart's love and commitment over our mind's reasonable murmurings to keep us safe. Our opportunities are so much greater now, but so, too, are our anxieties. How do we make the ride smoother? How do we minimize the worry we experience? Stress and anxiety often come from too much expectation and too much ambition. Then when we don't fulfill that expectation or achieve that ambition, we experience frustration. Right from the beginning, it is a self-centered attitude. I want this. I want that. Often we are not being realistic about our own ability or about objective reality. When we have a clear picture about our own capacity, we can be realistic about our effort. Then there is a much greater chance of achieving our goals. But unrealistic effort only brings disaster. So in many cases our stress is caused by our expectations and our ambition. Constant stress actually wears down our telomeres, the caps on our DNA that protect our cells from illness and aging. It is not just stress but our thought patterns in general that impact our telomeres, which has led Epple and Blackburn to conclude that our cells are actually listening to our thoughts. Epple and Blackburn explain that it is not the stress alone that damages our telomeres. It is our response to the stress that is most important. They encourage us to develop stress resilience. This involves turning what is called threat stress, or the perception that a stressful event is a threat that will harm us, into what is called challenge stress, or the perception that a stressful event is a challenge that will help us grow. The remedy they offer is quite straightforward. One simply notices the fight or flight stress response in one's body, the beating heart, the pulsing blood or tingling feeling in our hands and face, the rapid breathing, then remembers that these are natural responses to stress and that our body is just preparing to rise to the challenge. When we see others as separate, they become a threat. When we see others as part of us, as connected, as interdependent, then there is no challenge we cannot face together. When I meet someone, I always try to relate to the person on the basic human level. On that level, I know that, just like me, he or she wishes to find happiness, to have fewer problems and less difficulty in their life. Whether I am speaking with one person, or whether I am giving a talk to a large group of people, I always see myself first and foremost as just another fellow human. That way, there is in fact no need for introduction. We need to be willing to admit our vulnerability. We are often ashamed of these fears and hurts, thinking that if we were invulnerable, we would never experience pain, but this is not the nature of being human. If we can have compassion for ourselves, and acknowledge how we feel afraid, hurt, or threatened, we can have compassion for others, possibly even for those who have evoked our anger. Constant fear, constant anger, constant hatred harms our immune system. Everybody tries to take care of his or her health. So they need both a healthy body and a healthy mind. A healthy mind is a calm mind. Fear and anger are destroyers of a calm mind. Then you realize that anger is no use in solving problems. It will not help. It creates more problems. Then eventually, through training of our mind and using reasoning, we can transform our emotions. If we can discover our role in creating the situations that upset us, we are able to reduce our feelings of frustration and anger. Also, when we are able to recognize that the other person has their own fears and hurts, their own fragile and human perspective, then we have a chance of escaping from the normal reflex of anger. Sadness is seemingly the most direct challenge to joy. But it often leads us most directly to empathy and compassion, and to recognizing our need for one another. Sadness and grief are, of course, natural human responses to loss, but if your focus remains on the loved one you have just lost, the experience is less likely to lead to despair. In contrast, if your focus while grieving remains mostly on yourself, what am I going to do now? How can I cope? Then there is a greater danger of going down the path of despair and depression. So, again, so much depends on how we respond to our experience of loss and sadness. Grief is the reminder of the depth of our love. Without love, there is no grief. So when we feel our grief, uncomfortable and aching as it may be, it is actually a reminder of the beauty of that love, now lost. Despair can come from deep grief, but it can also be a defense against the risks of bitter disappointment and shattering heartbreak. Resignation and cynicism are easier, more self-soothing postures that do not require the raw vulnerability and tragic risk of hope. To choose hope is to step firmly forward into the howling wind, bearing one's chest to the elements, knowing that, in time, the storm will pass. Suffering can either embitter us or ennoble us, and that the difference lies in whether we are able to find meaning in our suffering. Without meaning, when suffering seems senseless, we can easily become embittered. But when we can find a shred of meaning or redemption in our suffering, it can ennoble us. Hope is the antidote to despair. Yet hope requires faith, even if that faith is in nothing more than human nature or the very persistence of life to find a way. Hope is also nurtured by relationship, by community, whether that community is a literal one or one fashioned from the long memory of human striving, whose membership includes Gandhi, King, Mandela, and countless others. Despair turns us inward. Hope sends us into the arms of others. The number of close friends people report having has reduced from 3 to 2. While we might have hundreds of Facebook friends, our true, close friends are decreasing. Perhaps most concerning of all, 1 in 10 people said they had no close friendships at all. People in the big cities are very busy, and although they may see each other's faces or even know each other for several years, they have practically no human connection. So when something happens, people feel lonely because they have no one they can turn to for help or support. Our whole society has a materialistic culture. In the materialistic way of life, there's no concept of friendship, no concept of love, just work, 24 hours a day, like a machine. So in modern society, we eventually also become part of that large moving machine. You can spend 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days in a cave and not be lonely, but you can be lonely in the middle of a crowd. We often are alone without feeling lonely, and feel lonely when we are not alone, as when we are in a crowd of strangers or at a party of people we do not know. Clearly, the psychological experience of loneliness is quite different from the physical experience of being alone. We can feel joy when we are alone, but not when we are lonely. Much depends on your attitude. If you are filled with negative judgment and anger, then you will feel separate from other people. You will feel lonely. But if you have an open heart and are filled with trust and friendship, even if you are physically alone, even living a hermit's life, you will never feel lonely. The paradox is that although the drive behind excessive self-focus is to seek greater happiness for yourself, it ends up doing exactly the opposite. When you focus too much on yourself, you become disconnected and alienated from others. In the end, you also become alienated from yourself, since the need for connection with others is such a fundamental part of who we are as human beings. This excessive self-focus is also bad for your health. Too much fear and distrust, too much focus on yourself leads to stress and high blood pressure. When one is thinking about others with kindness and compassion, one is never lonely. What causes suffering in life is a general pattern of how we relate to others: envy toward the above, competitiveness toward the equal, and contempt toward the lower. Usually, we don't actually compare ourselves to the hedge fund billionaire or to the genius scientist or to the supermodel. We tend to compare ourselves to those who are in our social circle. And then he offered another remedy for envy: motivation. Certainly with envy, it can also be a spur, you know. It can help you say, I haven't got a car or a house like that guy, so why don't I aim to work to try and get something like that? As the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama had said, these external goals will not bring us true joy or lasting happiness. But motivation to improve our situation is certainly better than envy of someone else's. Often envy comes because we are too focused on material possessions and not on our true inner values. When we focus on experience or knowledge, there is much less envy. But most important is to develop a sense of concern for others' well-being. If you have genuine kindness or compassion, then when someone gets something or has more success, you are able to rejoice in their good fortune. For a person who is committed to compassion practice and a genuine sense of concern for others' well-being, then you will rejoice in others' good fortune because you will be happy that what that person aspires for is being obtained. Preventive measures are the best way. Yes, if some disease has already developed, then there's no other choice but to take medicine. So similarly, once a person develops a strong negative emotion, like anger or jealousy, it is very difficult to counter it at that moment. So the best thing is to cultivate your mind through practice so that you can learn to prevent it from arising in the first place. For example, the major source of anger is frustration and dissatisfaction. At the moment when an emotion like anger is full-blown, even if we try to use our experience and our knowledge to reduce it, we will find it is very difficult to stop. At that point it is like a flood. During monsoon season, it is too late to stop the flooding. We need to start early in the spring and investigate what is causing the flooding and try to build flood walls to prevent disaster. Similarly, for our mental health also, the earlier we start practicing preventive measures, the easier and more effective they are. The suffering is what makes you appreciate the joy. You see, in reality, like our physical body, where growth takes time, our mental development also takes time, minute by minute, day by day, month by month, year by year, decade by decade. Nothing beautiful comes without some suffering. Our almost natural response is, when I'm hit, I hit back. When you have been refined, you want to find out what it is that impelled this other one to do what he did. And so you put yourself in the shoes of the other. So it is almost an axiom that generosity of spirit seems to require that one will have had setbacks to remove the dross. How we try so hard, with our natural parental instinct, to save our children from pain and suffering, but when we do, we rob them of their ability to grow and learn from adversity. You can't expand the volume of your chest just by sitting. You have to walk up mountains. Your natural longing is to want to sit still. But if you do that and become a sofa cabbage or a couch potato, it's going to show. So what is true physically is, in a wonderful way, true spiritually as well. Deep down we grow in kindness when our kindness is tested. Because of the shock suffering causes us, our arrogance falls away. Suffering also gives rise to compassion for all others who are suffering, and, because of our experience of suffering, we avoid actions that will bring suffering to others. Marriages, even the best ones, perhaps especially the best ones, are an ongoing process of spoken and unspoken forgiveness. As our dialogue progressed, we converged on 8 pillars of joy. 4 were qualities of the mind: perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance. 4 were qualities of the heart: forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. Our perspective toward life is our final and ultimate freedom. We suffer from a perspectival myopia. As a result, we are left nearsighted, unable to see our experience in a larger way. When we confront a challenge, we often react to the situation with fear and anger. The stress can make it hard for us to step back and see other perspectives and other solutions, but if we try, we can become less fixated, or attached, to one outcome and can use more skillful means to handle the situation. If you think you are just a normal person, one human being out of 7 billion, you see there's no reason to be surprised or to feel like I should be something special. So whenever I'm with queens or kings or presidents or prime ministers or beggars, I always remember that we are all the same. Acceptance, whether we believe in God or not, allows us to move into the fullness of joy. It allows us to engage with life on its own terms rather than rail against the fact that life is not as we would wish. It allows us not to struggle against the day-to-day current. The Dalai Lama had told us that stress and anxiety come from our expectations of how life should be. When we are able to accept that life is how it is, not as we think it should be, we are able to ease the ride, to go from that bumpy axle, dukkha, with all its suffering, stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction, to the smooth axle, with its greater ease, comfort, and happiness. While each of us should do everything we can to realize the goal we seek, whether or not we succeed often depends on many factors beyond our control. So our responsibility is to pursue the goal with all the dedication we can muster, do the best we can, but not become fixated on a preconceived notion of a result. Sometimes, actually quite often, our efforts lead to an unexpected outcome that might even be better than what we originally had in mind. Life is constantly unpredictable, uncontrollable, and often quite challenging. Generally, when we speak of cultivating compassion for someone, we are cultivating compassion for someone who is actually undergoing acute suffering and pain. But you can also develop compassion for someone who may not be experiencing acute pain or suffering right now, but who is creating the conditions for their own future suffering. For example, people who are committing negative actions, committing harmful acts that create a lot of pain for others, are creating karma that brings very serious negative consequences. So there are many reasons to feel a sense of real concern for their well-being. When you have a sense of concern for their well-being, then there is no place for anger and hatred to grow. We stand firm against the wrong not only to protect those who are being harmed but also to protect the person who is harming others, because eventually they, too, will suffer. So it's out of a sense of concern for their own long-term well-being that we stop their wrongdoing. This is exactly what we are doing. We do not let anger and negative feelings develop toward the Chinese hardliners, but in the meantime we strongly oppose their actions. There is an important distinction between forgiveness and simply allowing others' wrongdoing. Sometimes people misunderstand and think forgiveness means you accept or approve of wrongdoing. No, this is not the case. We must make an important distinction. The actor and action, or the person and what he has done. Where the wrong action is concerned, it may be necessary to take appropriate counteraction to stop it. Toward the actor or the person, however, you can choose not to develop anger and hatred. There are certain people who act out of the animal mind. When someone hits them, they want to hit back, retaliate. With our human brain, we can think, if I hit back, what use will it be in the short term or in the long term? We can also realize that obviously nobody was born to be cruel, to harm us, but because of certain circumstances, now he or she dislikes me, so hits me. Perhaps my behavior, or attitude, or even my facial expression contributed to this person becoming my enemy. So I was also involved. Who is to blame? So sitting and thinking of the different causes and conditions, then you see that if we are really angry, we must be angry toward the causes and conditions, ultimately their anger, their ignorance, their short-sightedness, their narrow-mindedness. So that brings a sense of concern, and we can feel sorry for these people. So it is totally wrong to say that practice of tolerance and added practice of forgiveness are signs of weakness. Totally wrong. 100% wrong. 1000% wrong. Anthony Ray Hinton spent 30 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. He was working in a locked factory at the time of the crime that he was being accused of. When he was arrested in the state of Alabama in the United States, he was told by the police officers that he would be going to jail because he was black. He spent 30 years in a 5 by 7 foot cell in solitary confinement, allowed out only 1 hour a day. During his time on death row, Hinton became a counselor and friend not only to the other inmates, 54 of whom were put to death, but to the death row guards, many of whom begged Hinton's attorney to get him out. When a unanimous Supreme Court ruling ordered his release, he was finally able to walk free. One does not know the value of freedom until one has it taken away, he told me. People run out of the rain. I run into the rain. How can anything that falls from heaven not be precious? Having missed the rain for so many years, I am so grateful for every drop. Just to feel it on my face. When Hinton was interviewed on the American television show 60 Minutes, the interviewer asked whether he was angry at those who had put him in jail. He responded that he had forgiven all the people who had sent him to jail. The interviewer incredulously asked, "But they took 30 years of your life, how can you not be angry?" Hinton responded, "If I'm angry and unforgiving, they will have taken the rest of my life." Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you liked it.